Hello, everybody. It's me, Chris Seep. No, really. It's okay. You don't have to. No, really. It's okay. It's okay. It's nice to be here. It's nice to have an audience. It's nice to be accepting this award on behalf of. Oh, I'm sorry. The jokes are later. The jokes are later. Really. Sorry. I found my noise-making machine, which kind of makes me happy. What are you gonna do? You can't do anything about it. You have to sit and listen. All right, so it's Tuesday, November 17th. And if you are watching this, that means you didn't get to class today for whatever reason, but that's okay. Hope you're well. Hope those around you are doing well. The goal of today's deal is going to be to finish our chapter on Reconstruction. So if you've been missing a few classes, remember I do these every day, and you can go back and watch the videos and make sure you're taking care of things that you need to take care of. Don't forget to, get in any back work that you owe me. I'm planning on doing some parent emails here in the next couple of days. Let them know how you're doing. Let them know what you're missing, all that kind of happy stuff. And, they'd rather get it. Things are going well than you're missing things email. So today, the goal of things is to finish Reconstruction. We're going to talk a little bit about life in the South. When we were in class together, we did a little bit of review at the end to make sure everybody was on the same page. Don't forget you've got that assignment due tomorrow, that Reconstruction and Race in the South, the thing link where you click on the parts of the picture to get the things that you need. The test. Okay, so here's the way the test is going to go. You're going to get 5 short essay questions. By short essay, I mean they could be answered like a paragraph, maybe more, depending on how wordy you are. You're going to pick 5 or 3 of those. So you're going to have to do 3 out of 5. Then if you do 3 out of 5, you do them really, really well, you get a 3. I'm going to include one optional question that you can do to get a 4 on the test. Please make sure you read it. Sometimes people don't read it because they don't think they'll get it right. But read it, go through it, and hopefully you'll do well. So if you have any questions about any of that, please let me know. Like I said, we're going to go through a few slides and talk about, make sure we finish up the chapter. So without further ado, here we go. All right, so far we've talked about kind of 2 out of the 3, 2-ish of the 3 questions that needed to be asked during Reconstruction. Who's going to be in charge? We talked about the congressional Reconstruction plans. We talked about Johnson and Lincoln's plans. And we talked about the fact that radical or military Reconstruction ended up winning out. And we've talked a little bit about what we're going to do for the freedmen, the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments. As far as the South goes, what punishment are they going to get? Well, they've got to pass those amendments, and that they saw that as a punishment. But then we've got some other factors that are going to play into things like, what was it like to live in the South? And so one of the really big issues was the South was an agricultural economy. They were farmers by trade, mostly growing things like cotton and tobacco. And those crops are pretty labor intensive. You need a lot of workers to do those things. And so what happened when slavery disappeared is the South had to rebuild their entire economy. They had to come up with a way to replace that labor at a cheap rate. The landowners, the former slave owners, did not want to pay the freedmen much. Now, obviously, they had the black codes on their side where they could hold pay, and being unemployed got you thrown in jail. But there's only so much of that you can do and get away with for a long period of time. And so initially, when the Civil War ended, in some areas, the freed slaves, the black people, were actually given the land of their owner for a bit. And that caused a little bit of a ruckus because, people claimed that land was not like rightfully earned and bought and things like that. And so often in court cases, it was found that was an unlawful thing to do, to give the land away like that. And so the land was returned to the slave owners. In some places, they did a contract system. Now, in a contract system, you sign a piece of paper where you're agreeing to work a certain number of hours for a certain amount of money over, a certain length of time. And because of the lack of literacy that the freedmen had, they were often cheated. And not only were they cheated in the way the contracts were written, but again, given the black codes, they were often cheated in pay. There was no minimum wage, so they weren't even making enough to get by. And so neither of those systems was acceptable to either side. And so eventually a third option arose called sharecropping. Now, sharecropping is very much what it says it is. but I'm going to run through it anyway because it does actually still exist in parts of the world. I don't know if it's the best system, but I also don't think it's the worst system ever. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to spin the camera around so you can see one of my little boards in my classroom, and I'm going to grab a marker. I didn't really plan ahead on how I was going to do this, so I apologize. I guess, man, that for me, and there you go. God, I love this thing. I've just found it in my cabinet. I am so sorry. So I'm going to spin this around where you can see one of my boards. I will be right with you in a moment. All right, I'm back. Now, we've got a little backlighting here. I'm going to actually, let's see, drop these down for a little bit here, maybe. Actually, they haven't probably been lowered since last March. That ought to do it for us. And we'll get this one now so we can actually see. Hey, look, there we are. We're back. Okay, so what's going to happen here is we're going to imagine that this piece of this board here used to be all of my land, hundreds and thousands of acres. Now, on those acres, there were slaves that picked cotton, they picked tobacco, and I'm not saying slavery is a good thing, and please don't take it that way, but let's just say that my house was here, and I sat on my porch all day, and I drank lemonade, and other people did all the work. Now, the Civil War ends, the slaves are freed, 13th Amendment, the 14th Amendment, the 15th Amendment. None of these things really set up anything that's going to make things fair for the freedmen, even though on paper they do, systemic racism. But I still have all this farmland that I want to farm. They tried to give my land to the slaves. That didn't work. I sued in court. We tried a contract system, but it wasn't fair. And so we go to sharecropping. Now in sharecropping, what happens is we take the land and we break it up into, relatively even chunks. Let's just say like this. Okay, now my house is there, so I'm going to stay right here. I can't draw, so I'm going to make me a stick figure. There we go, more like a pie figure if you really look close at that. Okay, now what happens in sharecropping is I rent my land out to you. Now I don't rent it for money, okay, because you're not always going to have enough money to pay me, and I want to have something that can take the place of money. And so what we do is we make an agreement where every year I get a percentage of your crop at the end of the year. And so if the person that gets plot of land number one wants to be a, cotton farmer, okay, I buy them all the seed, all the tools, everything they need to be the best darn cotton farmer that they can possibly be. I give them the supplies they need to build themselves a little house. Basically, I set them up with everything they need, and then at the end of the year, I'm going to get 2/3 of their cotton. Let's say this person wants to farm cucumbers. This person wants to do pumpkin, and so on and so forth with each one of the things. Every one of you guys, I'm going to buy the seeds that you need. I'm going to get what you need to be a successful cucumber farmer. If you want to turn them into pickles, I'll get you the jars. I'll get you the vinegar. I'll get you all the pickling spices. Pumpkin people, this is easy. Pumpkins grow like crazy. So I'm going to get you the pumpkin seed. If this person's a tobacco farmer, this person wants to grow beets. This person wants to grow rutabaga. You name it, we can grow it. But my part of the deal is I'm going to buy you the things that you need to be successful. Okay, so there's a positive for you. You're not having to put anything out as far as the beginning. Now, you also get to set your own schedule. You're your own boss. If you're the pumpkin farmer and you want to start work every day at noon, okay, 12 p.m., you go right ahead. If you're the cucumber farmer and you don't want to work on Sundays, that's fine. Don't work on Sundays. You're the boss, man. But at the end of the year, when everything's said and done, and you picked all your pumpkins, or your cotton, or your cucumbers, or your beets, or your rutabagas, or whatever it is you're growing, you're going to give 2/3 of them to me for whatever percentage we agreed on in advance. Most of the time, the landowner got more than half. Now, that's obviously a negative to you. You put in all that work. I literally sit and drink lemonade, get fat on my porch, and I'm going to make more than you. But that's what you pay for the land. Another negative, when I go to the store or the farm co-op or whatever to sell the crops, I'm an important white person. So when I go in and I have the bushel of corn or the the wagon full of pumpkins, I'm going to get a good price for those. When you come in and you're poor white or you're black, you're going to get offered way less than I am. Now, in good years, you might be able to make a little bit of money. In bad years, I still get 2/3 of your crop. You're not going to make enough money to survive. A lot of families were big back then, so you're not going to be able to feed your kids. You're not going to be able to have clothes for them. You're not going to be able to buy them the things you need. And here's the problem, my friends. You don't have any money. But who do you know that does? This guy right here. I'm more than happy to loan you money, all right? But here's the deal. I'm going to loan you $100 so you can get through the year. $100 would have been a lot of money back then. I'm going to loan you $100 so you can get through the year. But you can't leave the land, or your family can't leave the land until you pay me back. The problem with this is, in theory, you're going to make money every year. Eventually, you're going to be able to pay me off, or you're going to buy your own land or whatever. But that's not what happens. You're going to have enough bad years in there that you're going to keep falling further and further in debt to me. And when you decide you don't want to farm anymore, your son or your daughter will be trapped on that land, and so on and so forth, forever and ever and ever, until the sharecropping system is no more. So it was good in that we got our own positives. You have a little place to live. You get to be the boss. You get to decide what you want to do. You get to have the hours. You get all those things. I obviously get someone to work my land for me, but the negatives for you are great. The negatives for me, man, I guess the only thing that hurt me is a bad year where I only get 2/3 of whatever you get. But I'm still white in the South, and so I'm going to make it. It's going to be okay. All right. Now, another thing that happens is there's a lot of other social issues that happen in the South. I'm going to spin this back around so we don't have the light in my eyes. I'll come around. I made it. I'm out of shape. No, I'm kidding. All right. So the black codes were made illegal by the 14th Amendment. The problem is the system itself was already set up. It was already seen as an acceptable setup for there to be two sets of laws, for there to be two sets of everything. Often in the towns and cities in the South, the sheriff was a white person. And so if they agreed with the black codes, they didn't necessarily stop enforcing them. Life didn't change. You know, when things get to be a tradition, that's the kind of things that people follow. And so the 14th Amendment was often ignored, that equal protection of the law, the citizenship. Those things were not going to go away. And so a system was created where laws were enforced unfairly. People were targeted based on the color of their skin. And because of the lack of money in the black communities, often black communities were put on smaller chunks of land that weren't in the most desirable parts of town. And money just didn't come into those areas. The 15th Amendment, though, was supposed to make that so much better because if you could vote, you could elect people who would look out for you. And so Southern states figured out that there was a lot of power in the vote, and they wanted to remove that power. And so Southern states developed ways to not stop black people from voting altogether, but making it a lot harder. And the first way was something called the poll tax. Now, a poll tax is basically a charge to vote. And so here's the deal. One George Washington, kind of crinkly and folded in the corners, but one George Washington just the same. Let's say we live in a southern state. Well, let's say South Carolina. And in South Carolina, it costs $1 to vote. Now, in some places, they wouldn't even bother charging the white people, but let's say that we live in a place where they're going to charge everybody. And so I'm working at the election poll, and in walks a white person. Hello, Mr. White Person. Would you like to vote today? It costs $1 to vote in the state of South Carolina. So they hand me $1. I hand them their ballot. When they come back, I take their ballot and I hand them the $1 back. It costs them $0.00 to vote. If some white person came in and they didn't have $1, I might go, hey, welcome to the state of South Carolina voting polls. It costs $1 to vote in South Carolina. They're like, oh, I don't have one. I reach into my pocket. I'm like, oh, here you go. They hand me the $1. I put it back in my pocket. They go and vote. I take their ballot. Thank you for voting, white person. Now, a black person comes in. Odds are they probably didn't have $1 because of the way that they were paid. So when they walked in and said, hi, I'm here to vote, and I was like, oh, it costs $1 to vote in the state of South Carolina. They said, oh, I don't have $1. Was I pulling this $1 bill out of my pocket to hand it to them? No. I was like, oh, sorry. That's not your lucky day. Go back home. Go sharecrop. Go live in your segregated society. If a black person did come in, I've even read stories like this. They would take the money, hand you the ballot, keeping the money now. I'm going to stick that in my pocket. You go and vote. And then when you come back, give me your ballot, in some places, the ballots were ripped up. That's voting fraud, by the way. For those of you guys who follow the news, there's a lot of talk about voting fraud. That would be an example of voting fraud. Regardless, the number of black votes dropped because of poll taxes. In other places, they gave literacy tests. A white person would come in. What's your address? What's your name? Spell your first name. Name a book. What color is my sound machine? All of these things would prove that you were literate. But if a black person came in, they were actually given a test. Multi-questions, often extremely unfair. They'd be extremely difficult to pass. But if I gave you the literacy test from Mississippi in 1870, I doubt highly any of you would pass. No offense to any of you. You're all gifted creatures. And you're proving to be good American history students, but I don't like your odds. Last but not least, there was the grandfather clause. Now, the grandfather clause, it means a lot of different things, but at this point in history, it basically meant that if your grandfather didn't vote, you couldn't. And so when you think about a white person coming in, their grandfather had always had the right to vote. They didn't have to prove anything. Now, when a black man comes in and they go, hey, in the state of Alabama, we operate on the grandfather clause, did your grandfather vote? Well, the answer is going to be no. And so you can scoot yourself right out of here and not vote. Now, but let's say your grandfather's alive, so you go and get your grandfather. Well, we've got another unique problem now. They'll look at your grandfather and go, did your grandfather vote? Now, given life expectancies, medical care, and the life of a slave, the answer is always going to be no. And so the number of black votes in the South dropped drastically. The amount of black representation in government dropped drastically. And therefore, the voice of the newly freed slave was taken away. And that impacted the life of people in the South for years. These things happened into the 1900s, well into the 1900s. The KKK and groups like the White Brotherhood were terroristic all over the South. We've talked about them several times in this chapter, but they used lynching and violence as a way to not only stop voting, to kill people, obviously, to force them out of the South, and to basically lead people to live a life in fear. Those hate groups still exist in the country that we live in today. And last but not least, the South was then dominated by something called Jim Crow laws. Now, Jim Crow was not a real person, but Jim Crow laws basically made segregation the law in the South. Jim Crow laws became the norm. Things like this Imperial Laundry Company, we wash for white people only. That sign is actually from the 1920s. Very common for there to be 2 drinking fountains, for there to be hotels that only accepted white people to stay, restaurants that only serve white people. If places did allow both races to be served or stay, the black accommodations were not as good. They were not in as good a spot. They were not offered the same things. When movie theaters first opened in the 1920s and 30s, movie theaters forced black people to sit in the balcony. In old days, the floor was slanted, and then there'd be a balcony up high. They forced black people to sit in the balcony, and they couldn't buy things from the concession stands. Think about Rosa Parks. Rosa Parks was forced to sit on the back of the bus, and that wasn't apparently the best spot to be. I know you guys all fight to sit on the back of the bus, but not then. Segregation stayed the norm into the 1950s and 1960s. Systemically, it was promoted all over the South and even in parts of the North. When people would move to the North seeking freedom, they often found that cities were broken into white and black areas. Segregation may not have been plastered in their faces, but it was definitely everywhere in front of them. Right, now the last slide, the end of Reconstruction. Now, the end of Reconstruction is a little hazy, and here's why. It isn't really the end. In 1876, Ulysses S. Grant has served his terms as president, and he doesn't run again. And there's an election between Samuel Tilden and Rutherford B. Hayes. The election is extremely close. We're talking closer than the one that people are still arguing about today, 2 weeks later. They can't declare a winner. The popular vote is very close. No one has enough electoral vote. The electoral vote is disputed. So the two sides come together to try to come to an impasse, and a compromise is reached called the Compromise of 1877. Now, in the Compromise of 1877, Rutherford B. Hayes, the Republican, becomes the president if he promises to remove all the troops from the South and end Reconstruction. Hayes says, fine, but you all have to at least accept the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. We'll pull the troops from the South, and we'll go back to business as usual. The Democrats agree. Hayes is sworn in as president. The troops march out of southern states. The 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments become part of the Constitution forever and ever. But Jim Crow laws, segregation, sharecropping, the KKK, the White Brotherhood, poll taxes, literacy tests, grandfather clauses, black codes still in some places all become the norm. And the quality of life for a black person, a newly freed slave in the South, is low. The chances of violence are high. And the odds that the government is going to send the army down again to deal with it, well, we'll talk about that later in the year, probably about April or May. Now, this leaves Southern blacks to the mercy of the Redeemers. Now, if you remember on Monday, we talked about the Redeemers. Redeemers are people that had two goals in mind: economic growth and white supremacy. Well, if you're black and one of the goals is white supremacy, I think you know how this is going to go. And systemic racism takes hold. And I've mentioned this a couple of times in this video so far and a few times throughout the chapter, but basically a system that's set up for one group of people to fail or be held down. Now, you can have your own opinions about whether or not those things still exist today. I will let you educate yourself and believe what you want to believe. But in the South back then, there was definitely a system set up where things were separate and not in a good way. So, are you going to let this be? Well, some people back then decided that segregation wasn't okay, that it wasn't federally legal. And so there was a lawsuit called Plessy versus Ferguson that made it all the way to the 9 most important judges in the country, the Supreme Court. After hearing the case, the 9 Supreme Court justices decided that separate is okay as long as it's equal. Now, there's a tricky word there. Separate is okay as long as it is equal. The tricky word is equal. Here's the problem. If you walk out to a drinking fountain, let's say over here, there's a drinking fountain. It has cold, crisp, clear water. The kind that you would expect to get at bottled water, the kind you would expect to get at a restaurant, maybe the kind that comes out of the tap at your house. Over here at this fountain, Monteshot water. Well, I mean, technically they're both water, and therefore you can drink them, and therefore they're equal. If I brought in on one of your birthdays, if I brought just a 10-layer chocolate cake, professionally decorated, beautiful, and then on another one of your birthdays, I brought you a jelly bean, I don't think we would say that is equal, but technically we could say I brought you a birthday dessert. See, so there's a little bit of trickiness here and a little bit of slyness. Now, Reconstruction kind of formally ends when a man named Booker T. Washington, I'm going to shortcut this a little bit, and I'm going to call Booker T. Washington the Martin Luther King Jr. of that era. He was a civil rights leader who believed that African Americans were being treated poorly. He was African American himself. Booker T. Washington gave a famous speech called the Atlanta Compromise. And in the Atlanta Compromise, he surprised a lot of people when he said that for now, Black people needed to accept the situation that they were in and keep working hard, that someday equality would become the norm. Now, if you think about this chapter and you think about some of the loose ends, there's a lot of problems that never got solved, a lot of reconstructing that never got the final nails nailed in, and a lot of systems that were set up that in design they're good, but they're all flawed. And I think you can say that a lot about many times in history, but maybe more so about Reconstruction. Test tomorrow. I hope you got this all done. I know I talked a long time. I apologize. I was kind of barfing stuff out at you, and I apologize. Oh, I hit the wrong button. I think I have a barf button. We don't need the barf button. All right. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. I'll see you guys on Wednesday. Bye-bye.